The way my personality method is based, it's based on values. I think when we do things contrary to our value system, that's when it gets really stressful, right? That's when things start feeling like down, we're not particularly motivated.
Welcome back to Educator University. What if understanding your own personality could help you stop burnout and reclaim your energy? Today's guest is Eric Gee, a published author and life coach whose personality typed over 50,000 people and spent 2 decades helping people thrive. With his fun, practical animal archetype system, Eric brings personality science to life and cuts through popular psychology myths. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, how's it going?
It's
I'm
so
glad
good to
be
have
here.
you on. I'm so excited to hear about personality types for teachers and also maybe for their students as well.
Most teachers fall into certain personality types, so it's always great to know that not everybody is like that, because I think when you're in a school and you're surrounded by a bunch of teachers with similar personality types, you might assume that all your students are like that. But of course, students come from all backgrounds and all different types. So
Yeah, I love that. We're going to go ahead and dive into all the pieces of the educational puzzle. But just starting off, I like to focus on teachers first, kind of getting that feel for why they might be interested in this idea. And I think one thing teachers are kind of saying over and over again is they're feeling stressed, they're feeling a little overworked. And I think they're always wanting to think, how can I work smarter and not harder? And I think you kind of mentioned in your theories that psychology and personality can really be a key component to working smarter and not harder. Can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, I think when you understand your own personality type, I think the easiest thing is you start understanding, oh, these are my natural strengths. Now, are you automatically going to be good at that? No, but it just means that you're probably going to like that particular thing. Like some people are way more structured, right down to the way my personality method is based, it's based on values and a value system. And I think when we do things contrary to our value system, that's when it gets really stressful, right? That's when things start feeling like down, we're not particularly motivated. So I think one of the value systems that's a few of the personality types have is safety and security. So if you know your value system is safety and security, then you know that when you gear your lessons towards that, like you're leaning into your strengths. Obviously, a lot of elementary school teachers tend to fall into those personality type categories more so than maybe like a high school, and especially at the college level, just because I do think, obviously anyone who's been an elementary school teacher knows it is about creating structure, creating a safe space for young kids to develop.
Yeah, so kind of figuring out your style can help you not be kind of, paddling upstream. You're kind of using your current, using your strengths to build the classroom that fits not only your students but also your personality.
Yeah, no one wants to be that left-handed kid who's the teacher keeps banging on their left hand and saying, "Oh no, use your right hand." Imagine going to school like that your entire life. Yeah, it's gonna suck. And so I think in general, if you're a teacher and you're going there and people are telling you like you need to teach this way, maybe not. Maybe go lean to your strength, because I had mentioned safety and security being a value system for certain personality types. For others, it's not. For others, like excitement is their personality or is there a value system based on their personality type, right? So if your excitement is your thing, maybe get the kids outdoors, maybe have them grabbing things, maybe utilize your strengths and key that in with the lessons that you're teaching, and that'll help you be more excited about what you're doing every day.
Yeah, and one thing we've talked about on this channel more recently is actually possibly even if you're feeling a little stagnant in your career, changing subjects or even grade levels. And that's kind of leaning into that idea of finding what you like and pursuing it more because some topics may have more of that than others.
Yeah, if you're
Yeah.
if you're into excitement, let's face it, you probably don't want to be a history teacher. A lot of history is just, okay, read this, read that. I know there are fun ways to do that, and maybe if you are, maybe you could have them do cosplay. Maybe you could schedule the Battle of Gettysburg and have the kids represent that. That would be pretty exciting. But if you can't do that, or if you don't want to do that, maybe you shouldn't teach history. Maybe you should teach gym or art or maybe science, something where there's a lot more activity going on versus the structure that you're going to get from like a history class.
Yeah, finding what fits you in the classroom and as you move into your career is such an important piece of engaging in that personality piece. And you've
Yeah.
really created a unique personality system. I'm kind of curious what makes your system unique in terms of other different from other systems like Myers-Briggs or Enneagram.
Yeah, and it's based on Myers-Briggs, so that's where I started. That's something that I learned and was very helpful to me when I was young. But obviously, when you're going through it, I started. I had an education company and I worked with 1,000 students a year. So you're seeing so many people, and you start to see like patterns of behavior that don't necessarily fit, like let's say MBTI. Like I don't believe in introversion, extroversion, and I know that might be like some controversial thing for anyone who's read personality because everybody loves that. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're an extrovert, you're an introvert." But you meet enough people and you start talking to them and you start talking to them about that kind of stuff. And they're like, well, it's so stupid because I'm extroverted in this situation, but I'm introverted in this situation. So all this is kind of like nonsense, right? And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. So I think we have to take it contextually. And my methodology is all about context. So I had mentioned it's more value based. And I feel like when you base it on people's values, then yes, like if there's something that you value very highly, you are going to be more outward with your energy. You're going to be more outgoing. You might talk more about it. If there's something that you really don't care that much about, then you're probably just going to be chill and not really maybe seem particularly excited about it, right? And so I think that's where the difference is. I think a lot of personality typing methodologies focus on what you can see and how it manifests itself and what people are doing. And mine is more based on not what people do, but why they do it. Because you have multiple people who can write, but like if you take Hemingway and you take Tolstoy, they're writing for very, very different reasons. And I think those reasons are determined by our value system. And that's kind of why I base my personality typing methodology on that.
Yeah, I feel like it kinda goes past the superficial level and goes really deeper into the like you said, the why. And I think that's really interesting because as a teacher, for example, a lot of us are introverts, but we actually are in a profession that's more extroverted. We're in front of a classroom all day, but maybe and some of us, I would call ourselves introverts. Like you said, it's very dependent on what you're doing and why you're there. So very, very interesting to think about that idea.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and also like the definition of introvert is just mainly like some people feel more interior, but everyone can be reflective, right? So I think that's an issue I had also with MBTI too. I remember one person said, "Oh, well, this is the type that's going to be more altruistic and care about people." I'm like, every type can care about people. That's such an arrogant thing to say that only my type and people similar to my type care about people. Now, how you go about caring about people and helping people might be very different based on what you do, right? So I think in general, like I think so much of personality typing methodology is people like wanting to feel good about themselves. And I'm all about that. I want people to feel good about themselves, but in a very accurate way. I don't want people to just think, oh, yeah, I'm a good person and this person's a bad person, or I'm skilled at this and this person is not. No, it's really based more on what we want to do and our desires. And I think when you connect with that, I think it leads to a happier life, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a doctor or whether you're a deep sea fisherman.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more nuance that we have to embrace, and that's what your system kinda seems to do. And you've typed over 50,000 people, if that's correct. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an estimate, of course, but,
Yeah.
we'd had about 1,000 students a year, and if you count 1,000, 1,000 students, 1,000 parents, all those types of things, and over the course of my life, I use it so much. I'm such a personality nerd that everyone always asks, like, "Do you type people right away when you first meet them?" Like, I'm not really thinking about it, but I probably do it subconsciously, or not even at a subconscious level, but at a slightly below conscious level, and then afterwards, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I think this person is like that," and then my behavior is geared around that. So, yes, probably maybe more than 50,000.
So a lot of experience. I'm kinda
Yeah.
curious, how can teachers use this animal archetype system to better understand themselves and maybe even their style of teaching?
Yeah, the best thing is understanding yourself. I think it's a lot I would teach my teachers this in my education company, but of course, we work with students on a one-to-one basis and individually. So, it's a little easier when you're working with a student, obviously, to tailor your lessons around their personality type when you're doing one-to-one. In a classroom setting, it can be a bit more difficult, obviously. But the biggest thing is figuring out yourself first. I think a lot of teachers I had mentioned come from that personality, I call them packs, a personality pack that values safety and security because it just is a personality type that lends itself to wanting to be an educator. And so knowing that is important because you're going to get a lot of students that maybe do not necessarily fit into your pack, right? And I always use the example, like a lot of my teachers, the ones that picked up the personality typing methodology the fastest or the techniques the fastest were parents because it's very easy for parents to go, oh, shoot, no wonder why I love or I like this kid more than my other kid. I love them equally, but I really like my daughter more than my son. My son kind of pisses me off sometimes. They understood it right away. Just like teachers, probably treat all their students the same, but they do like certain students. Not that they ever say it out loud. They do like certain students more than others. And it's generally because your personality type tends to mesh. And the example I always give is if parents were to tell their kid if a certain personality type that likes safety and security and believes in authority tells their kid, "Hey, if you eat that cookie, I'm going to slap you." Right? The kid, if they're another type that likes excitement, they're going to be like, "Huh, okay. Like, is the cookie worth the slap?" But the other person is not even thinking like that. And most teachers generally are of a personality type that does not think that way. They're not thinking, "Oh, let me balance out the good and bad here." They're thinking more like, "No, I do not, the authority figure is telling me do not eat this cookie." So I think understanding that other types think in a totally different way helps educators quite a bit in terms of maybe tailoring, not necessarily the lessons because you have a whole class, but maybe tailoring the way you behave and respond to that student's behavior.
Yeah, could you possibly give us, like, an overview of the system? Like, is there there's different animals for different kinds of people?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was starting to give my explanation. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm using all this terminology
No,
that
it's
I
all
have
good,
not even
yeah.
explained. I'm like, what the heck? Yeah, so I break it down into 4 packs. I call them personality packs. And these are the very large packs, and I call them gatherers, hunters, shamans, and smiths. And basically based on their role, maybe in a medieval village. Also to explain why there's way more gatherers than, let's say, smiths. You only need like one gatherer, or you only need one smith to create the tools, but you need like a lot more gatherers and hunters to use them and execute and operate. So the gatherers, they make about 50% of the population, and they focus on safety and security. That is their value system. There are 4 animal types within the gather pack, just like there are 4 animal types within each of the other packs. So of course, 4 times 4 makes 16. So there's 16 individual animal personality types, and as I mentioned, the gatherers value safety and security. The hunters are totally different. Obviously, they hunt. Hunting is not particularly safe. But do we need them to do unsafe things? Yes, because if they're not, then no one eats. So I think a third of the population fits into that pack, and they value excitement. The shamans, they value self knowledge. So, like, just like the shaman in the village are kind of like the spiritual center of a community, they value self knowledge for themselves and others. And then the smiths value information, and they use that information to create tools of efficiency. So, we might not have a blacksmith or many blacksmiths now making like tons of like, I don't know, anvils and things, or using an anvil. But we do now is we have a lot of software engineers, and they're making the tools to make our world more efficient. Right. So I think that's how they would come into real life.
Yeah, yeah, that's good to kind of understand those 4 components and kinda how in your opinion, most teachers would probably fall under the gatherers. Is that what you were saying earlier?
Yeah, and sorry, that was a very, very quick thing, and it gets really wonky
Yeah,
really fast. So I'm sorry for anyone listening. It's like, what? That's a lot of
that's
random
good.
information that's being
Mhm.
thrown at me. But yes, most teachers probably fall under gatherers, but it's really interesting because, as I mentioned, you're probably going to find a lot of hunters as your PE teacher, your gym teacher, your art teacher. Well, not that they have workshop class anymore, but like things of that nature that are very hands-on, tool-based learning. Hunters love that stuff. Um, You'll find a lot of smiths in at higher levels of education. Not to say that they don't love working with kids, but in general, that's not a priority for them, is creating some safe space. They're just more like, no, I'm going to just give information and I'm going to delve more into my own research. So obviously at like the university level, you're going to find a lot of smiths. Shamans, you're going to find a lot as teachers as well, but they're going to be the teachers who do it and then they get burned out really fast. And I just know that from experience, obviously meeting a lot of them where they're like, oh, I believe in this. I love this. I want to give self knowledge to my students, which is great if they're in a situation that allows for that. You find a lot of education professors are shamans, but at the ground level, sometimes when you have, let's say, an administrator who's a little bit more strict and a little bit more rigid and is a little bit more telling you, like, no, don't do this because that doesn't necessarily follow state standards, that can be very worrisome for a shaman.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about those 4 domains and how they might be seen in the classrooms and seen throughout education K through 12, even higher. So, yeah, yeah. So kind of thinking about this, I'm thinking about a teacher listening and thinking, okay, I'm thinking I might know who I am from what you're saying, but I'm kind of curious, how can I use this information to help navigate things like parents or colleagues or even
Mm.
administration to help them as they go along their path?
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged dual-edged approach. Understanding yourself helps you kind of have that foundation of what's gonna, like, let's say you're talking to parent, and let's say you are a gatherer. You have to have confidence that, like, this is what I believe in, and this is what I'm creating, and I find this very important. And you have to establish that right away. Like, this is, you want to play on your turf and say, look, this is what's important to me. Like, we're creating a safe space. We're creating sound structure. But also, like, let's say you have a different parent. The parent is of a different type. So that's the difficult part, right? Is sometimes you have to read it really quickly. And let's say you have a parent who's a hunter. So I can give you a good example. This is not exactly the same, but kind of the same, since you had mentioned talking with parents. I used to, for my education company, we used to recruit at fairs where there are tons of other companies there, and we would be recruiting and competing for parents to sign up with us for this program. So, like, when parents would come up to the booth, I would have to identify, or I don't have to, but I would try to identify what personality type they were right away, because that way I know what would resonate with them. So if they were a gatherer, gatherers value authority. So when I was starting my education company, I was pretty young. So that was a little harder. So I made sure to, like, immediately going to the fairs, I would dress up student or shirt and tie, like as professional as I could, because I knew that that would at least balance out some of the fact that I looked really young with people like that. But if someone was a hunter walking up to us, I knew that what they wanted to hear was like, oh, no, this is gonna be fun. We're gonna make learning fun. Your kids are gonna be doing lots of things. They're gonna be moving around. They're going to be like, grabbing things and touching things. It's not just gonna be like book reading and book learning. Because for a hunter, book learning, not so great. As an adult, even so, like if you ask a hunter adult how many books they've read, unless it's something like how to play golf better or how to sell, stocks better, they're probably not going to have read it. And so each parental type, you can kind of like figure out what personality type they are. And that helps in terms of communicating what's important to them and important to you.
And maybe helps not take things so personally, 'cause sometimes I would imagine there's miscommunications between especially hunters and gatherers, that maybe, like, one's more maybe aggressive is a wrong word, but, like, a little more forward than the other.
Yeah, and that's a common conflict, right? Because they make up, if I add my additions correctly, since I said 50% and a third, that's about 85% of the population, right? And that's the one you'll see the most often. Everyone's seen Sesame Street. Everyone knows Bert and Ernie. I think we can pretty much figure out now which one Bert is and which one Ernie is. Everyone's like, well, maybe not everyone's seen The Odd Couple, but everyone knows that dynamic of the structured person versus the spontaneous person. But hopefully, my personality typing methodology goes a little bit more deeper into that and saying, like, look, it's not what they're doing, though. It's their values are so different. So understanding that your values are different, like you said, will not make you not take it so personally. Like sometimes I think we accept superficial differences in people, but we don't necessarily accept that the person across from us values something totally different. And when they do, and you argue about something like that, you do feel judged.
Yeah, and finding kinda understanding where they're coming from can be helpful in bridging that gap of communication, so that's good to know, kind of good for us to keep in mind. You mentioned the value system, which is such a big part of your personality system, and I'm thinking about teachers who could use this value system and this personality kind of idea to kind of reignite maybe some of their passion in teaching or find more confidence in their role. Have you found this to be the case in your work so far?
Yeah, it just basically, I think it just solidifies or validates maybe what your especially if you're a minority, and I use that term because I can't think of another one, a minority personality that doesn't, let's say you're a shaman type, like I mentioned, they find a lot of burnout, or you find a lot of them burning out because maybe their value system isn't necessarily matching with their administrators, right? At the very least, it validates that the way you view education is okay. Right. It's not like, oh, you are wrong and something is wrong with you. And because all these other people are saying something totally different. And it also validates that it's okay to have a different style and to do things differently. One of the movies that I mentioned, or the films that I mentioned in the book, to explain shamans is Dead Poet Society, which to me is, I mean, I myself am a shaman, so that movie is great in terms of education. And I'm like, oh, that is what educating is about. And obviously, I don't have anyone who's seen Dead Poet Society, but it's about a guy who's inspiring the kids to maybe do something and think differently and maybe go against the administration of a private school. So I think any shaman, if they're feeling down, all they have to do is watch Dead Poet Society, and that'll inspire them to, want to still teach and teach in the way that they want to teach.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece is not feeling people have a everyone has thinks differently, and so sometimes when you're with people who may not have that same thought group, you're thinking, "Oh, am I the only one who's like this?" And so kind of you're right, in a way, I think it could bind you with people who have a similar value system that would allow you to make those connections to feel like you're not alone, like you said.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's personality typing is always important because it makes us feel special because we know that this is like what makes us who we are, but also makes us not feel alone, like you had mentioned, because there are other people like us. And the nice thing is just find yourself in situations where you can talk to people like that. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't talk to different people, but I think especially for the minority personality types, it's kind of nice to interact with people, especially if you're from a small town or from an area where there's not that many people, because obviously percentage wise, what are the odds that if you're a town of 1,000 and you're a personality type that's only 2% of the population, that means that, I mean, there's only like 20 people, right? That you're like, oh, okay, like I got to find these, oh no, the 19 other people, right? Sometimes it's a little harder. Find your pack.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea. Along with kind of finding your connections and your maybe your people, your group, what do you think like personality can offer when it comes to teachers maybe making goals for themselves, whether it's personal or professional? How does their personality type help with that, the knowledge of that?
Oh yeah, I think in general, like not just teachers, but everyone, I think personality type helps us go like, oh, okay, it's okay for me to value this over maybe what I'm being told. You don't have to be, I don't want to say that other types are more materialistic, but certain types are maybe more conscientious of how they appear and their status. So they want to have a nice house. They want to appear, they want to go to be a big shot at the PTA meetings, like they want people to think of them as being like a fine, upstanding citizen in the community. But other types are not like that. And I think when you are seeking something that maybe does not necessarily fit your type, but you're doing it because people have told you that you should want that, I think that can be really damaging, clearly, right? It's like the lefty trying to be a right-handed. Like that's never going to necessarily fit. So I think understanding what your personality type will help you validate those feelings again. Like maybe you just want to go to Renaissance fairs or go to cosplay at Comic-Con, on the side while you're working, and that's fine. You don't have to like spend your whole life trying to afford, I don't know, the Maserati, right? Like I think in general, I think when we can find what we truly want, it's beneficial for everyone to no matter what their job is.
Yeah, I think what you're saying in a way is aligning your goals to your personality and owning that and feeling confident in those choices.
Yeah, and I think once again for minority types that's so hard because they've been told something different. And on the flip side, like that the Gather Pack, they're pretty good early on in their childhood. They're because everything that they value, they're told that they should value it. Like you value safety and security, and being responsible and being organized and structured. You go to school, and what is reinforced? Exactly those kinds of things, right? By their teachers, by your parents. You're getting good grades. You're gonna go to a good college. You're gonna get a good job. You're gonna build a family. Those kinds of things. However, that's why where a midlife crisis came in, right? Because I think sometimes when we don't think, haven't had to think and reflect about stuff because everything's kind of been set up for us. We don't necessarily think about whether we want those things, right? Just because a gatherer wants safety and security, and like so marriage or having a family maybe makes them feel that way. It doesn't mean that you necessarily want to marry that person or that person that you're being told, right? So I think it occurs where people have these midlife crises where they, especially gatherers, where they start realizing, oh my God, I never really thought about what I've been doing. And so now I don't really like the situation where I'm at. Where I always say like shaman types don't have a midlife crisis. Their whole life is a midlife crisis because they're constantly questioning themselves. So, I mean, it all works itself out in the end, but I have a lot of clients that I work with because I'm a life coach as well, where they're in their early to mid 40s and they're really just starting to figure out that they don't like the job that they're in and they don't like the situation. This personality helps because I can help connect them back to what is the core of what they value.
And I think this is something that teachers can resonate with at times because there's been I've heard a lot of like conversation about, maybe that they're not sure if they made the right choice, maybe in this career or just choosing the right grade level, like I said, grade level or subject. And so I'm kind of curious, it just made me think when you're talking about the different four different kinds of personalities, are there certain ones that are less likely to have this midlife crisis? Like do the hunters, are they pretty much straight as an arrow, or is it all across the board? Everyone has these issues, you think, in like sometimes the crises they have midlife or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. Hunters generally don't. Hunters, it only seems like that from the outside. It seems like they have a very happy life because they just kind of do. They're not very future oriented and they're not very past oriented. They're present oriented. So they just kind of do what's in front of them and what they want in the moment. And then the next moment, they do what they want in that moment, right? So as a teacher, that's why you'll find them more. I mean, I think once again, that's why I said Hunter's maybe not a history teacher because you're only looking to the past and you're just reliving the past over and over again, right? Something maybe more in the present, like a gym teacher or like art, something very physical. So hunters in general, like their issue is, of course, not necessarily the midlife crisis and questioning what they've done or where they are, because they're all not necessarily going to be in a static situation. They might start wondering when is it time, for lack of a better term, to settle down. Like, have I been going too crazy and exploring different things? And maybe it's time for me to like have some kind semblance of a foundation. So, which is not to get into a totally different subject, but that's why the romantic pairing of a gatherer and a hunter is the most common. Like, so if you look at couples all around, that is the most common, which seems odd because you'd think that a gatherer pairing would be the most common because gatherers make up half the population and they love safety and security. So marriage and, coupling is something very important to them. But actually it's hunter gatherer because I think in general, we all see that there's not something wrong with us, but we don't necessarily want to be with someone who's exactly like us. Like there's a lot of redundancy there. And also we know, at least at a subconscious level, what our weaknesses are. So we want someone who can complement them by, balancing them off with some strengths, right? Shamans, like I mentioned, they always have midlife crises throughout their whole life. Smiths, not really. Smiths will, sorry, I'm going to each one of these personality types
Yeah.
growth curves, but Smiths are more distant. They're also minority type, but as opposed to shamans, they're not trying to fit in. They're not trying to assimilate. They're more like, no, I got my thing. You guys are like this. Maybe you guys are idiots. Probably you guys are idiots, and I'm going to do my thing. So that's great in terms of confidence. They kind of do their thing, but of course they can be like hermits, right? Because they're pushing people away sometimes because they're just totally devoted to whatever information gathering they're doing. Generally, it has to do with work. And so they can be like the workaholic who doesn't really have any semblance of a social life or any semblance of relationships or connections. And I think that sometimes you'll find that with Smiths, especially when they haven't developed and they're older.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how each of the 4 animal type or the domain types kind of really can see burnout and exhaustion in a different way, and that's interesting to hear all the 4 points. Oh, and also the way you mentioned that certain ones complement each other, like the gatherer and hunter end up kind of pairing romantically, or I wonder even in friendship, is that often a very unique or really common pairing to have people of other is it common, I guess the question is it common to pair outside of your domain? Is that pretty common?
Romantic coupling, yes. Friendship, it varies, right? Because friendships, it depends on what you're looking for in a friend. Sometimes friends like people like their friends to be kind of like them, right? Because at the end of the day, their redundancy is not going to annoy you so much because they're not going to be living with you, right? But definitely with coupling, I think people tend to pair like gather hunter and then shaman smith tends to work out very well because shamans are always questioning themselves and Smiths do not question. So they give confidence to the shaman to say, no, you're correct. Just be yourself. Like be that. That's all good. And then but shamans are really great at personal connections. They're the most diplomatic of all the types. So they will bring the Smith back into the fold when the Smith, floats too far away from like people, actual humans. So that's the balance they get. And also they speak in an abstract language, whereas hunters and gatherers speak in a concrete language. And I think that is something that's a big difference too.
Yes, yes, and I appreciate how you kind of differentiated those in the discussion so far. I think another question I have for you is talking about boundaries, because I think teachers, along with burning out, one of the biggest things that has been a topic is just how do we create boundaries that allow us to sustain this career? And I'm kind of curious within
Mm.
the 4 domains, what are the how do they create boundaries for their personality type?
It's funny you mentioned that because I think since education, especially, is so gather oriented, the idea of boundaries is so perfect for a gather, right? Because it's like safety. Like, how do you keep a wall? Well, a wall is a bad metaphor because it sounds kind of terrible, but how do you have this safe space where I believe you're saying like where you're not getting too involved with your
Yeah.
students, at least emotionally involved, because then obviously they have a lot of stuff going on, you know, with things like that, I just always say just lean in to whatever it is you're doing. I think if you lean into it, because you have to accept that you're going to have some kind of pain in that profession. It's almost like being like a doctor or like this is gonna sound terrible, but an oncologist. If you're an oncologist, you know that you're gonna have great moments, and but you're gonna also have some really, really bad moments. And I think in education, it's that same thing. We would work with, I mentioned 1,000 students a year, and a lot of our students were not necessarily in the best circumstances, if you know what I mean. Moving around, not necessarily having parents, bouncing from foster parent to foster parent. And, I don't want to say that I would never tell my teachers not to be emotionally involved in that and to set a boundary. You just have gathers are pretty good at like sending like safe spaces, but I don't want to tell a hunter who's like, oh no, let's play that they should like protect themselves. I want everyone to lean into what makes them who they are because that's the reason why they're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good, like, kind of overview of leaning into our strengths and then also using that to decide how boundaries are made. I think boundaries also can mean from, like, what I've been talking to teachers lately too, it's about sometimes extra work is put on people without, like, extra pay or extra time or resources, and so I think each personality type might have a different way of approaching that in terms of kind of pushing back a little bit on that with, like, the bigger, wider scope of education. So
Yeah, I think with that extra work, that is brutal. And I know generally that extra work is work that certain personality types are not wanting to do because they don't really, if it's tedious, they're like, oh gosh, this is like why I do this. But I think that's why it's important to understand your personality types and have confidence that maybe even if someone from the outside is saying, oh, you're not having the kids do anything or you're not doing any work. But if you feel like you're doing work because it's linked to what you're doing, then I think there probably is work being done. I don't know. That doesn't make sense at all. But, I mean,
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is like, let's say a therapist, if a therapist is talking to someone at the end of the day, they were just talking to them, right? So someone might go, well, what work did you actually do? You didn't do anything. But a therapist knows, no, we did, that is my work. That is the work going on. And I think a lot of therapists are shamans. If you're a shaman, teacher, maybe some you don't necessarily have to do all this tedious labor and having kids like check the boxes and doing all this work to show people, oh, they did this sheet or they did this sheet or they completed this test. Maybe just talking to kids and interacting with them, doing what they call Socratic circles, things of that nature. Will like you can have confidence and no, we actually did work. I don't care whether something's on paper or not, but whatever we did, I think those kids are going to remember.
Yeah, yeah, really like I said in the beginning, connecting to your personality type can help you not just decide your subject, but also how you teach it and what makes you a teacher that, does your own thing and really teaches in your own way. So I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. You've worked with teachers and students a lot, it sounds like. Would you be able to share a story of a teacher, you can anonymously, of course, if you'd like, but who's used your personality test to help improve their life, maybe their work-life balance or their life in the classroom?
Oh yeah. Well, this is not going to be a. It's not going to be a positive ending. Well, I would say it's not. I know someone who quit teaching based on his personality type, and I'm not going to say,
Oh,
look, he is a panda personality type. Pandas actually make great counselors, great therapists. Um, Classrooms can sometimes be very overwhelming for them because they're so good and they're such great listeners, and obviously in a huge classroom setting. And he worked in a public school and junior high where you have kids like really bouncing off the walls, right? And really moody. Pandas are a shaman type, so they're very like they're like emotional antennas. So they pick up all this emotional energy, right? And especially you have all these like kids going through puberty and like 35 of them in a classroom. I think it just overwhelmed him. But understanding that, realize, oh, maybe this is not necessarily the field for me. This for lack of a better term, I think crowd control was not necessarily his strength, and I think it just became too overwhelming. So knowing that he was a panda though helped him he went back to school and learned a totally different field, which was information technology, and became a software engineer. So there, I mean, I know that's not a happy ending in terms of he didn't remain as an educator, but I do think that now he's in a better position now to where he can actually help people because now he actually tutors on the side and it's all one-on-one, right? So I think knowing that was like, oh, the one-on-one is definitely the best route for him. And I know maybe a lot of educators go, oh, well, that's easy. One-on-one is easy. The classroom is so much harder. I think that's also a fallacy, right? Because being one-on, it might seem easier externally to do one-on-one, but maybe you're as a teacher, if you're doing one-on-one and you're not necessarily listening to the kid as much because you're so used to, the bandwidth of all these kids, maybe you're not really doing a good job with that kid one-on-one. I mean, you're in control, but obviously one-on-one is really easy to have control, right? In the classroom, of course, but maybe having control of the kids is not necessarily the number one objective or should be the number one objective, right? So sorry that was not a happy ending, but I do think
well,
that
I
learning
think it is
about,
though. Yeah, I think happy endings can look different because I feel like if finding a teacher finding what they need to do for their own profession is, I think, a happy ending for anybody. So I would say it actually is a happy ending. Maybe I don't say teaching, but like you said, the one-on-one skill is actually is skill as well as to teach one-on-one, tutor one-on-one is a skill in itself as well. So yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I can speak from my own sense. Like, I work with a lot of kids too, and knowing personality types really helps, especially when you're doing things that might not necessarily be what people expect. And another personality, like, I would never do that. Like, I had a student who told me one day that she slapped a kid. She slapped a boy, and she was like in eighth grade, junior high. So my first thought, like just go naturally. Oh, was this boy bothering you? And she was like, yeah, he was being annoying and he was making fun of me. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, this boy likes her because, that's kind of what happens in your junior high. Boys and girls who like the others don't know how to express that. So thus they just make fun of them or be obnoxious. Right. So my response for her slapping the kid was like, oh, good for you. You got to stand up for yourself. And I think a lot of teachers might be like, oh, well, no, violence is bad, blah, blah, blah. You can't be like supporting that. I'm like, really? Because look at like, yeah, so adults don't do that. As an adult teacher, you don't, if someone were to do something terrible, like cut you off in traffic, you wouldn't want to respond in a certain way. And I think just that natural response helped her, especially knowing her personality type. If she was a more aggressive personality type, I would not have given that response because if she was, let's say, a shark personality type, you can kind of imagine what sharks are, who are always on the attack. I probably would have said, oh, you got to like relax, calm down. You can't always like respond so aggressively. But she was a very unaggressive personality type. She was a butterfly. And I think butterflies' weakness is that they don't take charge, they don't take initiative, they don't go for what they want. They kind of are pushovers and they let people kind of push them around. And academically, that's what was going on too. She just was not taking initiative in the classroom. And then when I said that, it was kind of my way of validating, yeah, no, you should take charge of your life. And she got a lot better. So that was a long story, but that was being an example of how knowing your students' personality types, you can really adjust the way you might talk to them versus another student with a different personality type.
Yeah, because each student really is unique, and just like teachers are, each student has their own personality and strengths and weaknesses as well. To help us understand this personalities a little bit more, could you, for fun, like maybe type a few famous people, either characters or real people in our society, that would help us to recognize some of these different characters?
Sure, and I think that's the best way to do it too. I mention that a lot in my book, because, you know, it's the idea of the book itself was to teach the person reading it that, you've everyone's met so many thousands of people in their lives, right? So hopefully the book will teach you how to connect with them better in terms of, oh, that's you'll start seeing patterns of behavior. We start going, oh, no wonder why that person was doing that, and that person was doing that too. So they might be similar, but that person was really different, and you start like kind of putting your own, especially your family members, especially your parents. I think that should be the number one thing so that people can know how they got screwed over by their parents subconsciously in like, oh, they were so different and that's why they were treating me this way and that kind of messed me up and that's why I am the way I am. But anyway, yes, I will totally do this. Let's start typing.
Okay, so maybe just like I'm trying to think, like Taylor Swift. What is she?
Oh, everyone always that's like the number one everyone always says Taylor Swift. Gosh, that's how much she's in like, the ether. She's a hunter for sure. Once again, a lot of people in the public eye are going to be hunters because there's a lot of hunters tend to perform. So there will be in entertainment and athletics quite a bit. So if you're going to ask me what Travis Kelsey is, also a hunter. Now they are a little different. Taylor Swift, I'd say, is a butterfly. Like I'd mentioned for my student, now she of course has taken initiative, obviously. Um, but butterflies kind of create things of beauty. They kind of go into their studio or like just like a butterfly, a cocoon, whatever their artistic cocoon is, and they go create things of beauty and then they express it themselves by bringing those out and sharing those things of beauty for other people to see or hear. And of course she's a songwriter and a performer. So that's, yeah, she's a butterfly.
Okay. I actually hadn't had any I didn't have any in mind, but I'll just put some out there. I'm just curious, like, in terms of fictional characters like Frodo from Lord of the Rings, what would you classify him as?
Frodo would be a shaman.
Okay.
And he's actually your typical. So Frodo would be the same as like Harry Potter, Arthur, like King Arthur, Luke Skywalker. They're this prototypical Joseph Campbell hero, and that would be the humpback whale type, which is within the shaman type, and they're of course seeking self knowledge, right? And of course they all like we don't know who Frodo's parents are, maybe we do, but they're not part of the story. And then of course we don't know who Luke Skywalker's parents are in the beginning, and Harry Potter doesn't have parents. Oftentimes they have that kind of loss of identities because that happens quite a bit in those stories, right? And of course, it's to just really hone in on the fact that they're a humpback whale, they're a shaman, self knowledge is their key, and since they don't have their parents, that even increases their desire to try to figure out who they really are.
I'm trying to think of somebody who would be in your Smith category. Would it be Steve Jobs? Would he be a Smith personality?
Yeah, that's it. Steve
Okay.
Jobs would be a chimpanzee. And I know I'm saying a lot of random types because, within the packs, they value the same thing, but they go about it differently. So I could say a couple different people within the Smiths, and you're like, oh, wow, like they are different. But then when you think about it, oh, but I can see a certain similarity to them too. Like Steve Jobs and Tim Cook are in the Smith pack. But Steve Jobs is a chimpanzee. They're innovative. They like just throwing stuff on the wall and seeing if it sticks. They love creating things. They get information by experimentation and inventing, and that's kind of their process. Another chimpanzee type would be Elon Musk,
Mm.
um, Iron Man, Tony Stark. Like they learn through like once again experimenting. They're also a little bit more mischievous and maybe will be offend people quite a bit because the way they get information, of course, is experimentation. And one of the ways you can experiment with people is just say something. Just say something that may or may not be offensive, but something very strong. And based on the person's reaction, then you'll get information based on that person. I know chimpanzees really well because my father was one and he would offend people all the time. But he's like, oh, now I know about them. Now, see how they respond to that? It wasn't anything personal. He would say stuff he didn't even believe, but he would just say it just to get a response from the other person. And that's, once again, experimentation.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a famous gatherer, but I can't even think. I'm trying to think, are gatherers not very famous? Because I can't think of anybody, but maybe hopefully you can help me out with that.
Oh, like fictional or real?
Either one, yeah. I'm trying to think of
Oh,
examples.
real,
Yeah.
real, like, yeah. I mean, obviously a lot of leaders. And I
Okay.
don't want to say that gatherers always make up the leaders, but they, some of them will be like the first, like a stag personality type, which is one of the gatherers. They're the school principal type, which is
Mm.
on a personal level. That was what my mom's personality type was, and my mom was a school principal. They just tend to be bossy, like when they're kids, especially. They're the ones when you get in a group with them for an assignment. They're the first person, like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. You're gonna do this. You're gonna do this. You're gonna do this, and you're just like, why are you telling us what to do? We're all students here, but they just naturally gravitate towards that role. So, like there are, let's say, like, well, the Bushes, or no, sorry, not George H.W. Bush was a gatherer. Sorry, I had to switch that because George W. was a hunter. Warren Buffett. I use a lot of, like, oh, Captain America. That's a fictional character, of course, but Captain
Mm,
America, Forrest
mm,
Gump, Rocky. Yeah, they're very structured. They're very sound. I love that contrast. Like, so something I mentioned in the book is gatherers value safety and security. Smiths value information. Very, very different things, and they can fight each other. And in the movie The Avengers, I don't know if anyone's seen that,
mm.
Captain America and Iron Man get into an argument, and Captain America is like, "Oh, you're selfish," because once again, he has totally different values. You're selfish. You don't really mean anything. You're not the type of person who would sacrifice themselves for their teammate, right? Would you fall on a wire to let the other guy go through? And of course, Iron Man's like, no, why would I do that? I would just find a way to cut the wire. And so, like, they're very different modes of thinking, right? Where Iron Man's like, I'm not thinking about sacrificing myself. I'm thinking about how to solve this problem. I'm going to troubleshoot it. Whereas Captain America is more thinking in terms of values, like, oh, will you sacrifice? Are you unselfish? Do you value your role in a community and in a team?
Yeah, that Avengers example is really good. I'm not gonna watch this I'm not gonna watch it the same way again when I watch it watch it next time, so that's a good one.
And
I
you'll see
think I
who
had
Iron Man hangs out with, and who Iron Man loves hanging out with is going to be another Smith. And it's so funny because there's something where I think Bruce Banner, of course, says like, oh, like, blah, 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 like he starts talking about something which is so wonky with tech and science terminology. And then Iron Man's like, oh, finally someone who's speaking my language, finally someone who's speaking English, and it's like, oh, okay, because they're exactly alike. So they communicate on a very similar level and everyone else is like, what are they talking about?
they get each other. The Smiths get each other, it sounds like.
They get each other, yeah.
I love
I think
that.
everyone gets each other because you'll
Yeah,
see like the hunters in the Avengers hang out with each other too. So like who are the two close hunters? Hawkeye and Black Widow, right? They're both hunters. They get each other. They're like, "Oh yeah, we've had a lot of experiences. Oh, is that the weapon you like? Oh, this is the weapon I like." Like, like this is the tool that I use. This is the tool you use. Like they get each other too.
yeah, I love that. I think, like, before we finish off, I gotta ask you, after talking to me, can you type me at this point? Could you maybe give me do you know what my type is?
Oh, that's a really good question. What's your favorite subject to teach?
Hard. I've taught 2 things in my life, and I both like them both, but actually, I think I like to teach about teaching the most. What I do here right now actually probably is my favorite thing I do. Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I mean, just that you said that, I mean, okay, one more thing. How were you as a student?
I was pretty good. I was not the smartest, but I worked really hard.
And did you always follow the rules?
Yes. Yes.
Did you ever join or start any clubs
Yeah,
in school?
100%. I started so many clubs. A
Okay,
long list.
I'm gonna say a dolphin. So a
Okay.
dolphin is a shaman type. It's a little different than some of the, like, well, I mentioned Dead Poet Society, so it's a little different than the teacher in that. But yeah, like, so because the fact that you said I like this and I like educating educators, and I mentioned dolphins make up a lot of well, I mentioned shamans, but really specifically dolphins are like make up a large percentage of education professors. And you can
Mm.
easily see they're a little bit more, I don't want to say idealistic, right? They're like, this is the ideal. Treat everyone differently and stuff. And then people get into class and I'm like, oh my God, like I don't have the bandwidth to be able to do all this, which is funny. And it's very true, right? Like you can't do all the things. Um, but yeah, dolphins are community based. But since they don't necessarily, safety and security is not their number one value, it's self-knowledge. And I think that's a little different. I think the way dolphins lead is different than, let's say, how a gatherer might lead. So I'm using that comparison because dolphins can appear like gatherers from the outside, but the way they lead is a little different. Like a gatherer will say, like, oh, I'm the authority, listen to me. And I want you to listen to me because I'm the authority, because that's some bit of certainty. But I don't think of dolphins and shamans, especially in general, thinking in terms of certainty. They don't like the idea of certainty because, of course, their value is self-knowledge, and discovering about ourselves is like a lifetime quest, right? Like there's nothing absolutely certain about anything, right? Especially when it comes to people. So dolphins the way they lead tends to be like, oh, okay, like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And they ask every individual within the group, because they want to know where they're coming from, and then they swoop in at the end and kind of bridge all those things together. That's the way they think about leading. So yeah, that would be my guess, is a
Yeah.
dolphin.
Oh, I love it. That was so much fun to kinda learn a little about myself, and I love dolphins, so that's perfect for me. I love
Oh,
that.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
love
and
it.
it's an education. It's an education, and you'd already told me early on that you like personality and you're really interested in that,
I do.
and
Yeah.
education and all those things kind of converge to like to kind of sound, yeah, very shaman-like, and then dolphin seems to be the right way to go. Dolphins are very similar to pandas, I mentioned earlier, but pandas are much they're much more proficient in a one-to-one setting, which makes them great therapists and counselors. Not to say that dolphins can't do the one-to-one, but they definitely prefer a larger group. So they might run the AA meeting, like they'll be that person, like the community organizers. They'll work in larger groups in general.
Yeah, and you mentioned you were a shaman. Which one were you?
I'm a baboon, which
Okay.
is not I always say this, it's not a flattering animal. It's because people like to complain about what animal they get. Like, no one complains if they get a fox. Every fox is like, yeah, I'm a fox. Okay, I know, I'm cool. And sharks are like, yeah, I'm badass. But like in general, like if someone gets like a beaver, they're like, a beaver, beavers are so boring. Like no one likes getting the beaver. So anyway, yeah, I'm a baboon, not flattering. And so the difference is, once you get into the different packs, like I'll just talk about shamans since we're both shamans. Dolphins and pandas are on one side, so they value people. And not to say that the other side, baboons and humpback whales, do not value people, but there are two things that shamans value more than other types. They value people and principles. And so the dolphin and pandas will lean more towards the people, and the humpback whales and the baboons will lean more towards principles. And of course, we value both, but that's kind of the divide that you'll see. So the example I give in the book, and I always use it, is if you're a teacher and if you're and let's say you're doing this really cool new thing that's really working really well, and then the principal comes in and says, you got to stop doing that because, it's not state approved. You got to stop it. Even if it's working, I understand, but it's not state approved. Stop it. And there's the implication that if you continue to do it, you might get fired. Pandas and dolphins will try to adjust their lessons so that they don't get fired. Mainly because they're pragmatic and they realize, look, I believe in what I'm doing, but I also believe that if I get fired, I'm not going to be here and I can't help the kids. And what's most important for me is these kids or whatever my classroom setting, right? So they will try to adjust, at the cost of maybe, at least in their minds, their own integrity. So that can be a bit of a conflict right there in their own selves, right? They feel like maybe insecure, or maybe like, oh my gosh, I sold out, whatever. On the flip side, baboon and humpback whale will say, screw that, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want, like, because I believe in it, right? Because they believe in it on principle. And obviously, the positive to that is it looks really courageous, it looks very powerful, it looks inspirational, but they'll probably get fired, and they will get fired. And so then they get fired and they're like out on the outskirts and they can't really affect people in general, right? So I think that's the difference between the two. And I'm a baboon, so, I just kind of say whatever I want. And I used to get in trouble a lot when I was in class. So that is a big difference too. Dolphins are not really getting into trouble that much in school, where baboons specifically, we find ourselves in the principal's office quite a bit.
Yes, same, like, area, the domain is the same shaman, but very different in terms of those 4 animals, how they come about. So, thank you for clarifying that within that one domain, because that helps us think about, like, maybe if people wanna explore more, they can learn more from your book about the other, ones and how exactly they would fit into that. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Are there any final thoughts that we haven't yet covered that you want to share with educators?
No, I mean, I feel like I think the one thing I will say is that I've talked a lot already, but I think find your anchor. I always say that, find your anchor first. It doesn't mean that you can't borrow from other types and, practice what they do, but I'm always like, find what you do first, lean into that, because the worst thing to happen is if you don't find who you are first, when you start borrowing and trying to be like other types, you're in danger of trying to become them and you can never fully become them. And if you keep doing that, then you'll never really grow into the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I love that. Find your anchor and figure out who you are so that you can be the best version of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and
We
a
have
shameless plug, you can find that all in my
Yeah.
book, that you can purchase anywhere you buy books. It's called The Power of Personality.
Yes.
If you wanna give Jeff Bezos your money, you can find that on Amazon. But
And
I
I will
always say go
I
to
will
local books. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say I'll link it right below here for you everyone to link
Oh,
and click
okay, yeah,
onto.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always say go to your local bookstore and you can order it from there too. So,
Yeah. Awesome. We have some fun, quick questions to finish us off, and then I'll make
alright.
sure to ask where they can find you. These are just like really, you can answer in a word or however long you want to. They're just to help us get to know you a little better as a person. The first question is favorite teacher. You are a teacher, kind of. Favorite teacher lunch?
Wait, favorite what?
Teacher lunch. Favorite teacher lunch.
Favorite teacher lunch?
I think you are a
Ooh,
teacher, sort
that's
of. So I'm like, that's kind of
yeah, oh,
if
that's
you yeah.
that's hard. I'm such a foodie, so that's why I'm like so thrown off. Sushi.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
Your best behavior management or emotional regulation tip.
Drinking.
Okay. A teacher that made a difference in your life.
Oh, that's a great question. Ooh, so many. Mr. Katzman.
Last lesson that you taught.
The last one, yesterday, I taught Avatar: The Last Airbender to a student. So, we broke down Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I'm just trying to teach the student how to she's very bright, but it's more about expressing herself because, she's homeschooled, so she obviously doesn't get a whole lot of interaction with people in general, so it's more about expressing herself. That is the goal. Like, if she's got an idea, tell me. Don't be afraid to say it. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, for being on today. I'm sure my audience is going to want to learn more about your personality system and in your book. Where can they find you? And again, I will link it right below this video.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have 2 websites, and I know it's people are like, "What? Weird. That's so weird." But one is because one is designed you can take the test, the personality test on our site, and once again, it's cookie cutter test. I'm not really down with all these online tests, but it's the best that I could design. I always recommend buying the book if you want more nuanced or more nuance. But you can find me at utopiaproject.com. That's YOU, like YouTube, utopiaproject.com. Take the test there. Or you can find about my life coaching at projectutopia.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being on, Eric. I'm excited to hear in the comments what kind of personality types we have listening today. Hopefully, they can figure out from our discussion which one they are. And yeah, thanks for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Annie.